You're flying at 8,000 feet, everything feels routine until the cockpit fills with choking smoke you can't escape. The engine is fine, but your airplane's wiring, installed to cut costs in the 1970s, is quietly betraying you. What looks like ordinary aluminum wire is actually shrinking, expanding, and loosening itself every time you fly, turning your electrical system into a hidden plasma cutter. 35,000 Cessnas and Pipers are flying with this legacy, and there is no federal order forcing anyone to fix them. The real question is this: is the next cockpit fire already building heat behind your instrument panel, waiting for you to trust it? Smoke doesn't wait for permission. It pours out from behind the panel, thick and white, clawing at your throat and eyes before your hands even find the master switch. Your headset fills with static and the sharp chemical tang of burning plastic. Every breath tastes like pennies and melted wire. The altimeter blurs. The checklist might as well be written in another language. This isn't a slow emergency, it's a countdown. Pilots learn to fear engine failures, but the cockpit fire is a different animal. It attacks the senses. It blinds, suffocates, and confuses. In the space of 90 seconds, a routine flight becomes a desperate fight for survival. There is no graceful glide to a field, no time to troubleshoot. The fire is not behind you, it is under your knees, inside your only exit. Swissair Flight 111, a wide-body jet cruising over the Atlantic in 1998, broadcast its final moments in clipped, panicked voices. The captain called "smoke in the cockpit." The fire started in a bundle of wires above the ceiling. Within 4 minutes, the crew lost their instruments. The heat melted aluminum supports. The cockpit filled with toxic smoke, and the crew never saw the runway. 229 lives ended before the wheels touched ground. General aviation pilots might think that was a jet. That was a different world. But the pattern repeats in smaller cabins too. The NTSB files are littered with short, desperate radio calls, smoke, burning smell, from pilots in Cessnas and Pipers. In a 2013 case, a Piper pilot caught the scent at cruise altitude. He landed in 90 seconds. The panel was scorched black. The cause was arcing behind a terminal strip, a wire that had worked itself loose after decades of vibration and heat. Electrical fires rarely start with a bang. They start with a whisper, a faint whiff of ozone, a flicker on the ammeter, a breaker that trips and resets. But when aluminum wire is involved, the margin vanishes. The fire ignores the master switch. It feeds on the current trapped behind the panel, turning wire into a white-hot filament that slices through insulation and plastic. In a small airplane, there is nowhere to run. The smoke barrier that saves time in an airliner does not exist. The only shield is your own speed and luck. Every pilot who has smelled that burning stench remembers it. The panic is not just fear, it is the realization that the fire is inside the walls, invisible, and moving faster than you can. The question is no longer how it started, but whether you can get the airplane on the ground before it finishes what it began. In the early 1970s, factory floors in Wichita and Vero Beach ran day and night, turning out Cessnas and Pipers by the thousands. The assembly lines moved with mechanical precision, bundling wires, tightening terminals, snapping panels shut. In those years, the world was hungry for copper. The Vietnam War had turned copper into a strategic material, and its price tripled almost overnight. Military contracts came first. General aviation manufacturers, squeezed by costs, faced a choice: pay more for copper or find a substitute. Procurement records from that era show a steady stream of purchase orders for alternative materials. Aluminum, lighter and far cheaper than copper, became the wire of necessity. It was already common in residential construction during the same period, and its failures there were just beginning to surface: house fires linked to loose terminals and cold-flowed aluminum stubs. But in the world of small aircraft, the focus was on margins and production quotas, not metallurgy or long-term reliability. Cessna rolled out more than 20,000 single-engine airplanes between 1968 and 1974. Piper added another 15,000 Cherokees and arrows. Each one left the factory with miles of wire behind the panel, much of it aluminum, chosen to keep costs down and production moving. In total, 35,000 airframes joined the US fleet with this hidden compromise sealed inside their walls. The regulatory response was silence. The FAA issued no airworthiness directive for aluminum wiring in these models. There was no bulletin, no recall, no warning label buried in the maintenance manual. The switch to aluminum was treated as a simple procurement detail, not a safety decision. For the manufacturers, it was a line item. For the pilots, it would become a legacy problem, one that would not surface until decades later when the first cockpit fires began to appear in NTSB reports. Corporate voices from the era, captured in trade publications and promotional films, spoke only of innovation and affordability. A lighter, more efficient airplane for the modern pilot, they promised. There is no record of an engineer raising a hand to question the long-term effects of aluminum under vibration, heat, and time. The decision was systemic, invisible, and irreversible. It spread quietly across the general aviation fleet, wiring the seeds of failure into tens of thousands of aircraft. Today, the cost-saving logic of the 1970s reads like a warning label written in hindsight. The copper shortage ended, but the aluminum remained, locked in place, aging with every flight hour. The regulatory void left a generation of airplanes exposed, with no official mandate to inspect or replace the suspect wiring. The risk scaled up with every new airframe, every factory shift, every unchecked assumption that cheaper meant safe enough. The true cost of that decision would only be revealed when the smoke started pouring from behind the panel and pilots learned too late what was hidden in the walls. A lab technician steadies a length of old aluminum wire under the lens of a microscope. The surface looks clean to the naked eye, but magnified, the truth is unmistakable. Tiny ridges, faint cracks, and a haze of powdery oxide. This is where the damage begins, far from the violence of fire, in the silent march of atoms and molecules. Aluminum does not just sit in a terminal. It moves, even after the factory worker tightened the screw decades ago. The metal grains inside the wire rearrange themselves each time the cockpit heats up or cools down. This is called cold flow. Over 1,000 cycles, morning pre-flights, mid-afternoon climbs, and chilly hangar nights, the wire slowly creeps away from the pressure point. A gap opens, so small it takes a micrometer to measure, but enough to loosen the connection. The technician measures a shift of just 0.2 millimeters after 100 thermal cycles. That is all it takes. Aluminum's coefficient of thermal expansion is 23.1 times 10 to the -6 per Kelvin, almost 50% higher than copper. When the panel heats up under the sun, the aluminum wire grows longer and fatter. When it cools, it shrinks, pulling back from the screw. The terminal does not move, but the wire does, breathing in and out with every flight. This mismatch is invisible until the day the connection starts to fail. Then comes the oxide. The moment aluminum is exposed to air, a thin skin of aluminum oxide forms, just a few nanometers at first, but it thickens over years, especially in a humid cockpit. The oxide is an insulator, not a conductor. Under a microscope, it appears as a dull, gray film, sometimes flecked with green or white powder, the so-called green death. The technician scrapes a terminal and finds the powder crumbling between the threads. This oxide layer increases resistance at the connection point. Even a thickness of 20 nanometers can block current, forcing electricity to squeeze through tiny spots where the oxide has cracked. Each time the current jumps, it heats the metal, and the oxide grows faster. The cycle feeds on itself. Galvanic corrosion adds another layer. Where aluminum meets copper or steel at a terminal block or a switch, the difference in electrical potential turns the junction into a battery. Moisture accelerates the reaction, eating pits into the aluminum, leaving behind scars and more powder. After 500 hours in a salt fog test, pits run 10 microns deep, undermining the wire from within. The technician notes that the resistance at these corroded points can rise from 10 microohms to over 1 milliohm, enough to turn a cool connection into a hotspot. None of this is dramatic. There are no sparks, no flames, just a slow, relentless decay. But every micron of oxide, every fraction of a millimeter of creep, is another step toward failure. The wire is changing shape inside the panel, shifting and insulating itself, setting the stage for the day when resistance turns to heat, and heat becomes the trigger for something far more violent. A single loose connection is all it takes. As the aluminum wire creeps away from the terminal, resistance builds at the contact point. What begins as a slow, invisible decay suddenly crosses a threshold. The connection, now insulated by oxide and corrosion, becomes a bottleneck. Current tries to force its way through microscopic gaps, and the metal heats up. At first, the temperature climbs quietly, 50, 100, then 200 degrees Celsius. But resistance is not a break, it is a fuse. The heat accelerates, feeding back into the wire, and the cycle turns vicious. This is thermal runaway. A materials physicist watches the process unfold under controlled conditions. The wire on the test bench glows red, then white. At 300 degrees Celsius, the insulation softens. At 500 degrees Celsius, it begins to char. The contact point, now a tiny oven, surges past 1000 degrees Celsius in seconds. Suddenly, the gap flashes with a burst of blue-white light. The air itself breaks down, forming a plasma arc, a channel of ionized gas hotter than a welding torch. Temperatures spike above 3000 degrees Celsius, hotter than molten steel. The arc does not just burn, it carves. In the lab, it slices through insulation and plastic in milliseconds, leaving a trail of blackened, melted debris. In an airplane, it can cut through a bundle of wires, a fuel line, or the plastic panel itself. The physicist points to the aftermath: a bead of fused aluminum, carbonized insulation, and a scorched terminal block. The signature is unmistakable, a narrow, jagged groove where the plasma leapt from wire to metal. This is not a spark, it is a plasma cutter, fueled by the airplane's own electrical system. The arc is indifferent to the master switch. As long as there is current, the fire can propagate, jumping to adjacent wires, igniting anything flammable in its path. The transformation from harmless wire to destructive arc takes less than a second. High-speed footage reveals the violence in slow motion. The arc flickers and dances, throwing off molten droplets. The wire recoils, insulation vaporizes, and the panel fills with toxic smoke. In the cockpit, this moment is the point of no return. The fire is no longer hidden, it is alive, visible, and spreading. Thermal runaway does not offer warnings. There is no gradual buildup, no gentle signal. The wire passes from warm to catastrophic in the blink of an eye. The only evidence left is a charred crater and the unmistakable smell of burned electronics. By the time the pilot reacts, the damage is done. The arc has already written its signature across the panel, and the cockpit has become a furnace. Immediate detection is the only hope, but even then, the plasma cutter may have already done its work. A mechanic pulls the cover from an old breaker panel and points to a terminal dusted with green and white powder. This is the first clue: aluminum oxide, the so-called green death, hiding in plain sight. He runs a finger along the wire, feeling for looseness. Even a quarter turn of play is enough to break the circuit's grip. The nose knows too. The sharp metallic scent of ozone or burning plastic is the cockpit's final warning. Pilots who survive cockpit fires say the smell hits seconds before the smoke. There is no time for debate. The clock starts ticking the moment your senses catch it. 60 seconds. That's the window between detection and disaster. The ammeter might flicker, or a breaker might trip and reset, especially the old Klickson style, which can mask a fault by cycling off and on while the wire behind it continues to heat. A breaker that pops and then stays cool is less dangerous than one that resets and hides a smoldering fuse behind the panel. The mechanic demonstrates a breaker that feels hot to the touch is a red flag. If the breaker trips more than once, leave it off, kill the power, and get the airplane on the ground. He points out the blackened insulation and the powdery residue around the terminal, visible scars of arcing and corrosion. These are not just maintenance issues, they are evidence of a system already in failure. In a cockpit fire, hesitation is fatal. The only safe response is immediate action, Recognize the clues, trust your senses, and land as soon as possible. The difference between a close call and a catastrophe is measured in seconds. Airframe and power plant mechanics face a blunt reality when they spot green corrosion or a loose terminal, fix it, or accept the risk. With aging aluminum wiring, there are only two real paths. The first is a full rewire, every inch of aluminum pulled from the airframe, replaced with copper and modern insulation. It is a demanding job requiring 40 to 80 hours of labor, stretching over 2 to 4 weeks, and costing $10,000 to $25,000. But the payoff is a wiring system that is nearly immune to the old problems. Resistance drops, reliability returns, and the threat of hidden fires nearly disappears. For those unwilling or unable to take on that cost, there is the Cockpit splice. This is not a shortcut. Each connection is cold welded with a hydraulic press, sealed tight against air and moisture. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, are needed in a single aircraft. The bill runs $5,000 to $10,000, and the plane sits for a week or two. But the resistance at each joint falls below 1/10 of an ohm. That is the difference between a safe terminal and a smoldering hazard. Some try to cheat, tightening terminals and hoping for the best. But aluminum does not forgive. Every extra turn crushes the strands, speeding up the cold flow that started the trouble. The fix that feels right only makes the problem worse. No Federal Aviation Administration directive forces the owner's hand. The choice is personal. But the facts are stubborn. Old aluminum will keep creeping and corroding until it fails. The only real decision is whether to act before the wire does. Thousands of aircraft still fly with aging aluminum wiring, their risks hiding in plain sight. Every year, another owner discovers that physics, not luck, sets the real limits on safety. Regulations may lag, but chemistry never waits. Today's pilots inherit yesterday's shortcuts, and the next cockpit fire is always a question of when, not if. The wires do not care who is flying, but now you do. Stay vigilant. Share your perspective below.